following program contains scenes that some viewers may find disturbing.
I got up that morning from Shawnee, went over to Debbie's apartment to get her to go eat lunch. I met Debbie when I was in the 9th grade. We were two peas in a pod.
Donna's lunch date is 21-year-old Deborah Sue Carter. Deborah's just moved into her first apartment where she lives alone.
I pulled in the driveway to get out. When I get to the landing of her apartment, there's glass. I'm stepping in glass. I could hear music. Her radio was playing. Knocked on the door. No answer. So I opened the door.
Debbie?
The first thing I saw was on the wall. I didn't know what it was at the time. That seemed a little odd. And I'm calling her name. The couch was destroyed, like shredded, you know, like ripped. I approached the bedroom door. That's where I stopped. And that's where she was laying on the floor naked. Her face was down on the floor. I didn't move past the doorway. And I was saying, Debbie, Debbie. She's not moving. There was things written on her back that, you know, in my mind, you can't process it that quick. On the table was written, "Don't look for us or else," and else was spelled wrong. And I reached down and I touched it. As soon as I read it, I'm thinking, they're still here. They're going to get me too. They're going to get me too. You got to get out, got to get in there, quick, 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 quick.
In a panic, Donna races across the street to a public payphone.
I said, Peggy, Debbie's laying there on the floor in blood.
Just shake her.
And she said,
She's probably just sleeping.
is she dead? And I said, I don't know.
Ada police arrive at the grisly scene, along with investigators from the Oklahoma Bureau of Investigation.
It is kind of unbelievable, the struggle that has taken place.
One of the EMT workers came downstairs and vomited. It was not something they generally saw and not something they were prepared for.
Deborah is nude with the exception of white socks on her feet. She is face down on the floor. A washcloth is stuffed into her mouth and partially down her throat.
The cord from an electric blanket and a belt are found beneath Debbie's body. A ketchup bottle beside her. It's clear she's been sexually assaulted. On the bedroom wall, a bloody smudge resembles that of a palm print. On her stomach, in a chilling echo of the Manson murders, the word die is written in red fingernail polish.
On her back, the name Duke Graham was written. On a wall in the living room was written, Jim Smith next will die. On a table in her kitchen was written with some misspellings, don't look for us or else. They dusted for fingerprints. There was one hair resting in the palm of her hand. There were some hairs on the washcloth that was in her mouth.
The crime scene was pretty brutal. The way the body was treated indicated a sadistic personality to me.
Sexual assault cases are not considered to be crimes of passion. They are crimes of power. And this did appear to be a crime of power.
Debbie's mother gets the terrible news from her sister and a close friend.
I looked at my friend, I said, "Did you go check on Debbie?" She said, "They never would look at me. They just looked straight ahead. They not one time would look at me." She said, "Yes, I did." And I said, "I get, she's gonna be, she okay?" And my girlfriend said, "I can't say that." And I leaned over my sister, and I just started beating on her. Just hitting her and hitting her and hitting her.
They told us who it was, and that it was a brutal murder. And we did a canvass of the neighborhood to look for anything out of the ordinary. I knew Debbie Carter since I was in high school.
In a town of just 16,000, it doesn't take long for news of the murder to get out.
From the KOMA 24-hour newsroom, the body of a young woman was discovered in a garage apartment on 8th Street in Ada this morning. Police are saying little. They're asking anyone with information about Debbie Carter to contact the Ada Police Department.
It was big news. A lot of people were worried, and rightfully so.
I was only 20 at that time. It was a lot to process. And I was scared, honestly. Things like this just don't happen here, and once it did, who did it? I don't know, but I don't want him getting me, and that might sound bad, but I was scared.
Everybody loved Debbie. No, Debbie didn't have any enemies. Who could have done that?
This was clearly a whodunit, and we've got no idea.
Investigators start with the two names scribbled in blood in Debbie's apartment.
They were two of the toughest guys in town.
But are they tough and violent enough to be Debbie Sue Carter's killers? Life in Ada, Oklahoma used to be simple and safe. That is, until the vicious rape and murder of a 21-year-old woman.
Ada was, to me as a child, the perfect little town.
You slept with your windows open. You didn't worry about intruders or somebody coming in the middle of the night.
Can't do that anymore.
The Deborah Sue Carter crime scene looks like something from a horror film, only this is real. The whole town is asking, why Debbie Sue?
She was always there for me, no matter what. Yeah, she was my best friend. Debbie was a beautiful girl. She was honest, a true friend.
Debbie just seemed so positive. She had such a wonderful outlook in life and was just kind of really coming into her own.
She was just more than this girl who got left on the floor.
Friends say Debbie knew exactly what she wanted out of life.
She was going to work, and she was going to get her own place. She wanted to be married someday, to have children someday. Guys, they were not priority. They were not. It was working.
Her days are spent waiting tables at the local coffee shop. At night, she heads over to the Country and Western Club, all to make ends meet. Debbie's independent spirit is a strong driving force.
She was very proud of living by herself. I went and spent the night with her a couple of times. She was as happy as she could be there.
Debbie's mother isn't happy her daughter has flown the nest.
I worry about you. What, you might get raped or something. She said, "Mom, as long as I've got teeth, nails, and feet, nobody's ever gonna rape me. Nobody."
I would not want to cross Debbie. Debbie didn't pick fights, but Debbie could finish fights.
Debbie's murder is a huge challenge for a police force more accustomed to handing out speeding tickets. First job for Ada PD, tracking down the two names scrawled in Debbie's apartment. They start with Jim Smith.
Jimmy Smith was a notorious thug in this community.
You know, could probably whip anybody in town, and he proved it a couple of times. No one wanted to have anything to do with him.
Smith is quickly ruled out when the police find out he's already behind bars. That's when they turn to the second man, Duke Graham.
Duke Graham was a businessman here who owned a bar. He was not somebody you wanted to trifle with either.
He ran with a pretty rough crowd sometimes.
I was working.
Graham tells the police the night of Debbie's murder, he and his wife were working in the bar until 10 p.m. Then they went straight home. His wife and bar staff back his story.
He had an absolutely ironclad alibi and no motive whatsoever to have any reason to harm Debbie Carter.
Someone is trying to frame Graham and Smith for murder. The question is, who? Detectives look into Debbie's last known movements to find out. The night she was murdered, Debbie was working an extra shift at the Coach Light, Ada's local watering hole.
It was a very slow night at the club to the best of my recollection, and there weren't a whole lot of people there.
One witness tells detectives he saw one of the regulars, Glenn Gore, talking in the parking lot with Debbie.
There was a bunch of us sitting at the table, just people that hung out together all the time, and Debbie was one of them. I went to school with this girl half my life, and she didn't feel good that night, and I walked her to her car.
Debbie is seen giving Gore a slight shove.
The witness stated that she did not appear angry, frightened, or upset in any way.
I opened her door, and I set her in the car. She left. I walked back in the pub.
Glenn Gore sort of ran around in the circle we ran around in.
Thank you for coming in today. Just trying to still have a few loose ends about this.
Glenn was a Little League ball coach at the local Little League ballpark. I had a son that was playing Little League, and I'd see Glenn out there before or after games. Seemed like a nice guy.
Detective Barrett takes a statement from Gore.
Deb, she walks up to me with her coat on, you know.
He had no idea of anybody that she had any problems or trouble with. And I asked him if he'd ever been to her house, and he said no, that he'd never been to her apartment.
He asked to see my arms, my neck, lift my shirt up. I didn't have any scratches.
Gore tells the detective he left the Coach Light at 1:15 after Debbie had already gone home. Another guy in the bar, Ron West, backs up his story.
And I said, Glenn, I'm going home. I hope you have a ride. He said, no, I need a ride. So I gave him a ride back to town and let him off where he said he was going to his mother's house.
Detectives learn later that night around 2:30 a.m., Debbie made an unexpected phone call to her friend Gina.
Hello? She asked if I would come over and pick her up. She said there were some people there, or there was someone there.
No, I can't really get into it right now, but...
And she just didn't really feel comfortable with them being there alone. The phone call struck me very strange. I had never known Debbie to, be fearful of anyone.
Minutes later, Debbie calls back and tells Gina not to bother.
That's going to be a conversation that I'll never forget.
What do you mean?
If I'd just gone ahead and gone over that night and picked her up, maybe things would have, turned out differently.
The autopsy reveals that in her last moments, Debbie put up a terrific fight.
It's definite defensive wounds.
All of the wounds had been inflicted while she was still alive. We have drainage that is semen that is down into the crotch area, so we know that there's been sexual activity. She also has been assaulted with a ketchup bottle, so it's rape by instrumentation. The cap from the ketchup bottle is actually found at autopsy up in the rectal canal. The final cause of death was suffocation, which could have resulted from either the strangulation from the ligatures or the washcloth that is in her mouth and partially down her throat.
3 days after her murder, the Carter family bury their beloved daughter.
The day they buried her, I don't remember that day. I wasn't going to her funeral. I wasn't going to go. I wasn't going to go.
My mom bathed her, washed her hair, and got her ready for the funeral because she was just adamant that she wasn't going to go.
I remember there was lots and lots and lots of people there. I mean, people were standing outside because there wasn't no room for them all to get in. I mean, Debbie was well loved, very well loved.
In this tight-knit town, the pressure is on to find the killer.
The hunt for the killer or killers of a 21-year-old Ada woman, Debbie Carter, continues.
Yet for Ada PD, their investigation is going nowhere. 3 long months go by before they get a break. In March 1983, they hear of a fight at Ada County Jail. An inmate is talking about the Debbie Carter case when another inmate viciously attacks him. Is the angry convict somehow involved in her murder? Three months after Debbie Carter's murder, her case is reignited when Ada police hear about a jailhouse fight.
Ron Williamson's name came up when he was in the county jail, and the murder of Debbie Carter was talked about.
Ron Williamson is a familiar face to the cops. Born and raised in Ada, he was a baseball star in high school, talented enough to be drafted. But while playing in the minors, injuries and alcohol do Williamson in. Returning home with broken dreams, signs of a serious mental disorder begin to get worse.
He was known to behave bizarrely. I saw him look like he was practicing karate in the middle of the street.
He would go in stores downtown and stand around and kind of stare at the women working in there, and they'd get uncomfortable. He had an ex-wife or girlfriend that he gave a lot of trouble to.
More troubling, detectives learn the washed-up baseball star has been accused of sex crimes in the past.
He had been charged with rape twice in Tulsa. One of them was dismissed, one of them was acquitted.
Under the police spotlight, Williamson claims he was at home the night of Debbie's vicious attack.
His mother said that he was there all night.
Detectives aren't convinced, especially when they learn Williamson only lives a few blocks from Debbie's apartment.
Ron Williamson could have very well left after she went to bed.
More suspicions are raised when one of Debbie's co-workers tells the police a few weeks before the murder, Williamson had been bothering Debbie at the coach light.
She said that Ron was being somewhat rude to her and kind of pushy, and she did not feel comfortable to continue to work in that section that evening because of his actions.
Williamson often hangs out with his buddy, Dennis Fritz, a single dad and high school science teacher from nearby Noble.
He was about the only friend Ron Williamson had. Literally.
Detectives are working on the assumption that more than one man may have killed Debbie, in part because of the chilling message left at the crime scene. Don't look for us, or else.
They started asking me questions about, my association with Ronnie Williamson, and did I know a girl by the name of Debbie Sue Carter? No, I never knew her. Do you know that she was murdered? Yes, I knew she was murdered. I read about it in the paper. So it, finally ended up, did you and Ronnie murder and rape Debbie Carter? I said, I don't know anything that you're talking about.
You two got drunk? No.
Despite Fritz's denials, he has no alibi for the night of the killing.
I wasn't there.
I thought that this girl that I knew in Ada, that I had been seeing briefly, I thought that, I'd been with her. I just couldn't exactly pinpoint the exact time. I couldn't be exactly for sure.
Both Fritz and Williamson take polygraph tests and fail.
They said I flunked it on a scale of 1 to 10, like an 11.
The news tightens when detectives learn more about their hell-raising around town.
One woman here in the Ada area reported that Fritz and Williamson had repeatedly come to her house late at night. The things they said and the way they acted scared her. She eventually had to pull a gun and force them to leave.
What made them good suspects was their conduct towards women.
It was one of the worst experiences.
One damning incident in particular stands out, though Fritz claims it's all just a misunderstanding.
One night, Ronnie and I went to Norman, Oklahoma, to a Holiday Inn club. And as always, he was kind of pretending to be a hotshot attorney from Dallas, Texas. And Ronnie had been dancing with this girl throughout the night.
According to her, Fritz jumps in the car, slams the door. Williamson jumps in.
I thought she was going to actually go riding around with us for a little bit.
They go through town running red lights. She's screaming.
And trying to jump out of the car door, and I'm going about like 45, 50 miles an hour.
Williamson is screaming, shut her up, shut her up.
I told Ronnie, stop her, don't let her jump out of the car till I find a place.
Eventually the car slows to make a curve. She jumps out.
The woman goes to the police, but decides not to file charges. Investigators don't find any fingerprints tying either suspect to the Debbie Carter murder. But hairs found at the crime scene tell a different story.
I had several hairs that were microscopically consistent with both Dennis Fritz and Ron Williamson.
In the early 80s, prosecutors, investigators were being told that hair analysis was the next fingerprint. I know this because I was being told it. When the report comes out that says 17 of these hairs are microscopically consistent with Ron Williamson and Dennis Fritz, that did not mean this may be them. It meant this is them.
And semen samples reveal Williamson and Fritz both have the same blood type as whoever raped and killed Debbie. This doesn't prove Fritz and Williamson's guilt, but it does increase the odds.
What are the probabilities that two people with this microscopically consistent hairs in the same blood type would end up in a crime scene?
To lay charges, Ada police need more, but no new evidence emerges, and the investigation grinds to a halt. In 1985, a new twist helps reboot the case. Glenn Gore, the barfly who was seen talking to Debbie in the parking lot, makes a new statement. Now he says he remembers Ron Williamson hitting on Debbie that night.
You're positive.
The second statement lays the groundwork that Debbie was anxious and concerned and afraid of Ron Williamson.
I knew who he was. played baseball at Asher. I knew he was a pitcher, and that's when they kept pushing the pictures in front of me. Said, "Do you know these guys?" I said, "I've seen them before."
It's still not enough to charge the two with murder.
We began to hear that they suspected Ron Williamson, but they couldn't prove that he did it. And he lived up the street from us. He lived in the next block. I can remember seeing him across the street and just, you know, almost not breathe as you were looking out the window and seeing him out there, just wondering if he, you know, if that's who did this.
Despite the evidence stacked against them, Fritz and Williamson maintain their innocence.
Me and Williamson talked on the phone. He said, I raped a woman one time in Tulsa, and I raped a woman right here in Ada, but I never, ever killed anybody.
In a case that's dragged on for 4 years, there's one nagging mystery: the palm print on the wall in Debbie's bedroom. Is it the killer's? Investigators tested the print against Fritz and Williamson. No match. Is the real killer someone else?
If I was a defense attorney and there was an unexplained bloody print in the crime scene, I would point at that and say, there's the killer.
Police say they have some leads in the case. No arrests have been made.
It's been more than 4 years since a 21-year-old waitress was raped and murdered in her Oklahoma apartment. Debbie Sue Carter's mother is still waiting for answers.
After I lost Debbie, I got to drinking bad. Bad. I'd go out there and I'd just get on that grave and just talk to her. You know, I had to. Everybody'd say, well, she's not there. Well, I know she's not there. The body's there. I love that body. You know, I carried that body in my body.
While Peggy prays her daughter's killer or killers are found, Ada police focus on barroom buddies Ron Williamson and Dennis Fritz. Both are prime suspects, but a bloody palm print left on Deborah's bedroom wall doesn't match either. So the prosecutor makes a dramatic request.
Bill Peterson said, Peggy, do you want this case solved? And I said, more than anybody. And he said, well, there's a handprint. And it's not Dennis's. It don't belong to Ron Williamson. And if it's not Debbie's, there's somebody else involved.
May 1st, 1987. Debbie's body is exhumed. The bloody palm print is hers. There is no mysterious killer. Relying on hair and blood matches, weak alibis, and an eyewitness who places Williamson at the club that night, the police finally press charges. Ron Williamson is arrested in Ada. Fritz, at his mother's house in Kansas City, Missouri.
The telephone rang, and a female voice said, is Dennis Fritz there? I said, well, you're talking to him. And click. So I thought, that's really strange. There was about 25 SWAT team members on the front lawn pointing automatic weapons at me, and I 360'd around, was handcuffed, and was told that I was being arrested for first-degree capital murder. My mother and aunt were shrieking in the background, and police were running in and out of the house, and neighbors had gathered outside. I still didn't click that this was about Debbie Carter. until I seen the two Oklahoma detectives walking down the sidewalk with big smiles on their face, like they had just, you know, gotten their man.
Williamson doesn't do himself any favors in custody.
At one point, Williamson said that he'd had a dream, and in this dream that he had killed her.
I can recall one statement he made according to a witness in the county jail. He was talking to his mother on the phone, and she would not do whatever it is he wanted her to do. And he said to her, if you don't do what I've said, I'll kill you like I did Debbie Carter. Now, that's pretty strong.
A year after his arrest, Dennis Fritz stands trial.
I hated them men so bad. Oh, every time they'd walk in, I'd just see them throwing my little girl around in that apartment. I could just see it.
I could feel their eyes, you know, staring holes, you know, through me.
Fritz claims he's innocent, but the jury disagrees. Convicted of first-degree murder, the former high school teacher is given life. 11 days later, Ron Williamson begins his trial.
And Ronnie was shouting, like screaming, as loud as he could scream. I'm innocent, I'm innocent.
The second time we went to court, Williamson got mad. He flipped the table, throwed his chair. He scared everybody in that courtroom. I mean, he was scary.
His outburst doesn't sway the jury. He's convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to death.
I wouldn't have ever walked in the courtroom if I didn't think they were guilty. So the fact that the jury ended up finding them guilty was not a shock to me. It would have shocked me if they'd have found him not guilty.
We wanted to see him die. And I feel like pretty comfortable and speak for most of my family when we all felt just fine that he was gonna stay on death row until he died.
Williamson is locked up in the Oklahoma State Penitentiary, the Big Mac. Fritz at the Dick Connor Correctional Center. The two convicts maintain their innocence.
My God, what on earth did I ever do to humanity to deserve an arrest like this?
I'm a totally 100% innocent man.
It literally was a nightmare out of hell, you know. I mean, it's something that just comes up like out of the dark and grabs you and takes you off. And to be under that onus of you know, such a horrible, heinous murder, and to be convicted of it, you know, it's just, it's more than the mind can handle, you know. I made up my mind that, you know, I was not going to go down with the greatest fight that I had ahead of me in my life. I spent every waking moment, even sleeping and dreaming about the law and about doing everything I could do to learn the law and write my own briefs and get myself out of this and prove my innocence. Ronnie, at that time, was on psychotropic medication, and Ronnie, he was losing it, you know. His bipolar illness actually manifested itself into schizophrenia.
Years pass, and Fritz's appeals run out.
You have to finally realize that you may never, ever get out of this place. You have to forget about everything that's the possibility. I was at the end of the rope. I was hanging onto a strand, and that's when the good Lord come in and the miracle happened.
That miracle is forensic science. In the years the two men have been behind bars, DNA testing revolutionizes murder investigations. Ron Williamson finally wins an appeal. Before his new trial, prosecutors agreed to test his and Fritz's DNA against the semen and hair samples found at the Carter crime scene.
Days seemed like a month waiting for these results to come back.
The man who sent Fritz and Williamson to prison gets a call from the lab.
She said, "You better sit down. There is not a match." My immediate response to that was, "You have got to be kidding me."
The 17 hairs that were linked to Fritz and Williamson, the DNA shows that those come from 8 different people, none of which is Fritz or Williamson.
I was stunned. I mean, absolutely stunned and flabbergasted.
I feel fine. How are you this morning? Good. Ron Williamson and Dennis Fritz walked into the courtroom in handcuffs. 20 minutes later, they were free men.
I believe it's incumbent on, based on the evidence that this case should be dismissed against them.
There was a little bit of animosity in my heart toward everybody on this earth for sending me to death row.
We use today's science and today's technology to right a wrong. The motions to dismiss will be granted for both of you, Mr. Williamson and Mr. Fritz. You're free to go.
It just seemed so surreal, like it really wasn't happening. But it was the most glorious day in my life, and I'll never have another day that glorious ever again in my life.
That's what all of our prayers, all of my family's prayers have been about, over the past 12 years, is for the truth to come out and for me to come home.
Feels very great. I'm so excited. Just can't wait to start our new life together.
My daughter was there. I got to see her for the first time, 12 years. From a little bitty girl, when she's a full-grown woman, looked just like my wife,
We were all really just in shock. Like how are you just going to let them walk away? And what about all the evidence you have against them? And, I mean, trying to wrap your mind around how everything that we had been told doesn't fit. And it doesn't make sense anymore. And these 2 men are just going to walk away.
More than 16 years after Debbie's murder, the case is wide open again. But now investigators have high-tech tools undreamed of in 1982. The semen samples found on Deborah's body are run through the National DNA Database, and CODIS comes up with a hit. An inmate on work release serving 40 years for burglary, kidnapping, and firing at a police officer. Inmate 153663.
And they said that, yes, he did match the DNA, but he'd also escaped from prison that morning. And I can remember just thinking, how can this get screwed up anymore?
Years after Debbie Carter's murder, advances in forensic science uncover a new suspect.
The killer in this violent assault that was a rape accomplished with murderous violence left his hair, his seminal fluid, his sperm on and in Debbie Carter. Now we know from DNA that the hair, the seminal fluid, the sperm, belongs to Glenn Gore.
I mean, Glenn Gore is someone that Debbie knowed her whole life. She probably never dreamed in a million years he would come in and do something like that to her.
After hiding out for 6 days, Gore turns himself in. A new prosecution team goes back, re-examines all the evidence, and uncovers serious mistakes in the original investigation.
He claimed to be home at his mother's that night, but she didn't have any idea where he was.
No, never. I've never been to Debbie Carter's apartment.
We know from the physical evidence that he, in fact, was in Debbie Carter's apartment. We had his sperm in Debbie Carter's panties at the scene, and no reason for him to lie about it, unless, of course, he'd done what we accused him of doing.
And the real kicker? Glenn Gore's two radically different statements. The day after the murder, he tells police he saw nothing out of the ordinary at the coach light and went home. Almost 3 years later, he says Ron Williamson was at the bar that night harassing Debbie. The original prosecutor never knew about the first statement.
It wasn't in Bill Peterson's file. It wasn't in the copy of the file that went to the Attorney General's office. It wasn't anywhere.
Turns out Gore's first statement was filed incorrectly and never left the Ada police station.
It would have caused me some very hard decision to make after that if I would have known in an important homicide case that a person made two different statements concerning the same incident.
My statements, they're what they are, and they're what they're not,
In fact, Ron Williamson was nowhere near the coach light that night. Almost 20 years after Debbie Carter's murder, prosecutors put together a picture of what they think happened in the early morning hours of December 8th.
The last night of her life, Debbie Carter worked a shift at the coach light. Gore followed her out to her car. She pushed him back and then drove home.
Glenn Gore went to her house. She let him in.
I think you should go.
He did something that made her uncomfortable enough to make a phone call, but not so uncomfortable that she didn't call back and say, no, never mind.
There was a vicious fight to the death in the bedroom. Very violent, in which Debbie Carter fought very hard for her life, was beaten down, strangled to death. Raped somewhere in the process, either pre, peri, or post-mortem. After she is dead, the killer stops and begins to stage the scene to try and skew the investigation.
Gore writes the names Jim Smith and Duke Graham, hoping the police will pick up on the bad blood between the two men. Armed with all their new evidence, prosecutors lay charges in April 2001. The trial opens in 2003. Gore claims he had a consensual relationship with Debbie Carter.
Yes, I had sex with Debbie Carter 3 times.
The jury doesn't buy it, and Gore is found guilty and sentenced to death. Gore appeals, and in 2006, he's sentenced to life in prison without parole.
Why didn't Glenn get caught the first time? There are explanations, but there is no excuse. If this scene had been worked the way a homicide like this would be worked today, he wouldn't have, period.
I would have never charged him if I'd have had DNA, but I didn't have that. So I played the cards that were dealt me, and a jury of 12 people found them guilty. I didn't have a magic wand. I'm not that good.
I have no doubt that the slow and twisted path that justice took in this case led to the imprisonment of the right person for the murder of Deborah Sue Carter.
Ron Williamson died in a nursing home in 2004. He was 51.
Ronnie just couldn't accept what he'd been through and how he'd been tortured and the pain and suffering that he'd went through. And sadly, it's a sad thing. Ronnie developed cirrhosis of the liver and died.
We went to get together, and Peppy and I went, and that's where she saw Dennis for the first time other than court, and they hugged.
I guess what I really thought about was Fritz. He had a little girl, and her daddy was in the pen while she growed up. And you know, I hated them two people so bad. And then for us to become friends, you know, that's strange.
Dennis Fritz now lives in Kansas City, Missouri. He works with the Innocence Project to help free other prisoners.
I tried to find out all I could about Debbie. For her to have to have went through that, and, you know, I'm very, very sorry that that happened, you know, to the Carter family and to Debbie.
Maybe the memory of her, that when you say her name, people remember who she was, and that she'll be a part of these things who may help other people.
2 innocent men sacrificed more than a decade of their lives locked behind prison walls. A young girl's life is cut short.
I just try to be tough. I don't know. But the missing, I'll always miss her.